CDC are looking at what can be done to contain this virus, and they're arguing about how careful you have to be. But we know that with all care, since all the people who have come to the US or other countries that have left those who have been infected have been direct contacts with patients, sick people. But even knowing that you're well protected in your own garments doesn't assure people that they will not be infected, because we have cases in the United States. The one that's very near here, Bellevue, is a doctor actually on the staff at Columbia University Medical Center who was with the Doctors Without Borders, and he himself came back and had been infected. He didn't know it, of course, when he came back, but he's currently in very serious condition, but stable. So we have a couple of cases in the United States, and the first case in Dallas was obviously a real snafu on the part of the CDC, because it was a person who went into a hospital. He had been in West Africa. He had fever. He went into the hospital, and he was sent home on antibiotics with full knowledge of his background. Then he came back 2 days later, very sick, and died. He was contacted by a nurse who became infected and who had some fever and called the CDC, and she said she had been taking care of a patient, but she has a slight fever. Is it okay to fly? And they said yes. And so things were not handled very well at the beginning, but I'm sure they will be, because everybody is concentrated on it. So what is the industry doing about all this? Of course, the industry went through the issues previously with HIV infection, and we're able to come up with the antivirals that have converted a dread, 100% lethal condition, a viral infection, into a chronic infection, which allows people to live normal lifespans and go back to work. So that's going. So what's happened? The people are trying blood transfusions and blood plasma or serum from patients who have recovered. That's the first line of defense. That's being done right now. There are antivirals that are being tested right now and used actually in the patient at Bellevue. And these are broad-spectrum antivirals that have some in vitro activity, but there is no drug today that is known to be effective and safe for this virus. And of course, people are looking at monoclonal antibodies. There are a number of companies doing this. None available today. The ZMapp, which was available in very limited quantities and had not really been shown to be effective in a good study. And so there's, fortunately, a number of companies that are going down that route. And there are a couple of vaccines that are in the mill. And so those will become available. But that, of course, is going to take many, many months to come through. And so initially, containment is the thing. But I'm sure the industry will come through as they have before, because we know how to do that. So much for that. The second thing I'd like to mention is what is happening in precision medicine, which has sort of been bubbling up to the surface over the last, I'd say, 5 years. In the city, which is where I hang around, New York City, I think all the major centers have recognized the availability of electronic medical records, and the ability to do inexpensive, rapid DNA sequences is going to eventually lead to everyone having a sequence who will allow it, and the risks that are spelled out in the DNA with the additional information that's coming in will be known to the doctors. And so the practice of medicine is about to go through a revolution, and it's going to come faster than all of us, I think, have been thinking, and that's good. The impacts that it's going to have in different parts of our industry are quite clear. In basic research, drug discovery is going to really be looking at targeting new targets from DNA sequencing, genome studies, which will be initially looking at patients that have unusual characteristics, and there are, and so that genes and their protein targets will be identified that can be drugs in specific areas where we don't have adequate therapy today. Those are already in the pipeline, and one has already finished phase 3. So we're going to see a blossoming of that kind of use in the industry. The development of drugs will be followed again with genome studies, so that as drugs, other drugs in various categories are studied, it will be recognized in a spectrum of patients who are being treated, those that have specific signals in their DNA that are going to be the responders. And those who in their DNA have specific patterns tend to have a lot of side effects. And so those will be on the label. And in the future, at some time, with any one drug, those patients that are going to be responsive are going to be the ones who are going to be prescribed the drug. So this is going to change the practice of medicine, absolutely. Another thing it's changing is the relationship between medical schools and hospitals, because as they have drawn apart in the past, over the last 25 years, they're going to come together because they need each other. That's the best way to get people to work together. The hospitals are going to absolutely need this information that's going to come from the knowledge of the medical schools and the development in the medical schools. And finally, the training of doctors is changing also, the education, because the students are going to have to be trained in the use of genomics right from day one, because it's going to be the background of the rest of their careers. And so I see a very positive thing in precision medicine. It was called personalized medicine, but it's going to have a huge impact. The third thing I'll just touch on is one of my favorites, and that is what's happening in the support of federal support of research. And this is, I would say, a near calamity for our society, and that is the shrinkage of NIH funding of extramural research, and intramural, in fact. Over the last 11 years, since 2003, the buying power of the NIH funding, which is now about $30 billion a year, has dropped 25%. 25% reduction over a little more than a decade. This is a disaster at a time when science is really blossoming and all kinds of new information becoming available. The consequence of that is that young people finishing their graduate work and postdoctoral fellowships and going to apply for a independent grant have shrunk. Previously, 1 out of 3 people with approved grant applications would be funded. Now it's 1 out of 6. And depending on which institute you're in, it could be less than that. So this is it's a terrible mistake of our government, and they just don't understand that expenses at NIH funding are really investments in the future in the improvement of health, and to cut back on that at this time is kind of ridiculous. And the average age of a person getting their first grant now is 42. Now, those of you who are my age or less, and I guess there's no one here my age, recognize that that's ridiculous. That is ridiculous. And so that has to change. And the fourth aspect of it is that not only is NIH shrinking in the amount of money they have, but the money that they're funding, the grants that they're putting out are being pushed towards translational research rather than basic research, where what we lack in drug discovery is new knowledge that comes from true basic research. And so not only are the total funds being shrunken, but the funds that are remaining, some of those are being taken away from the basic research support, which I think is a terrible mistake. And so I urge those of you who are not in academia, but in industry, to push on your senators and congressmen to teach them what is important in, okay, I'm right on time. So now I'm going to introduce the first panel of the day, and this one is heart attack guidelines. Mike Brown with his colleague Joe Goldstein and their panel are going to take over. Mike, and as you know, and Joe shared the Nobel Prize in 1985, I think, for their understanding of cholesterol metabolism and the discovery of the LDL cholesterol gene. And that has obviously been taken advantage of, all that information, to develop a very important therapeutic class and classes that have had an enormous impact on health. Can I invite the panel to come up? And Michael, let me have you take over.
Thank you, Roy.
Yeah. Welcome.